Oh, Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat you up or no? Lock you on the ground, take the crown away from you?
Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with the bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
of all the rules you break.
We've had enough
of all the money you make.
We've had enough.
No more life at stake.
We've had enough.
This is a proclamation.
It's been 400 years and we're 400 late. Together we stand from state to state. Going back in time won't make America great. We need justice now, people won't wait.
Action, no more distraction. Every step we take, we gain traction. If it can happen to one, it can happen to all. United we stand, divided we fall. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
of all the rules you were breaking.
We've had enough
of all the money you were making.
We've had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We've had enough.
This is a proclamation.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. You better believe, just roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough.
We've had enough
of all the rules you're breaking.
We've had enough.
All the money you're making.
We've had enough.
No more life gets taken.
We've had enough.
This is the proclamation.
We've had enough. Trayvon Martin and Tommy Rice.
We've had enough.
Michael Brown and Eric gonna pay the price.
We've had enough.
Philando, Breonna, George Floyd.
What? We've had enough.
So many gone, how can we fill the void?
How can we feel?
We had enough. John Crawford, I know you've heard.
We've had enough.
Sandra Bland, come on and take a stand.
We've had enough.
Sean Bell, what the hell?
We've had enough.
Freddie Gray, did you hear what I said?
We've had enough.
This is a proclamation.
That song is by Ryan. It includes my brother and several other Twin Cities artists, but it's a wonderful song. It speaks to the moment, and we'll play it again and more like it over the course of today's program and in future programs. A note, save the date or save the time. Tonight we're doing a special broadcast of Conversations with Al McFarlane at 6:30. At 6:30, we're going to be connecting with Safe Streets Minnesota. I think the right name is Minnesota Safe Streets, sort of a town hall originating from the North Community YMCA, featuring one of our state legislative leaders and the CEO of the YMCA of Twin Cities, and a number of other community organizations that are organized together to talk about safe streets, the Safe Streets Initiative and collaboration. So that'll be a good program tonight here on Conversations with Al McFarlane, live on Facebook. Be part of that program tonight. We'll look for you. It should be good. Mark it, let people know, and then if you get it, share it to your networks. Important information, particularly during the crisis time that we're in, as we're all on pins and needles watching the trial of Derek Chauvin for the death of George Floyd. Well, today I want to talk about education in general and about community. I've got three wonderful guests, and as always, I assure my guests that our conversation is just that, conversation. conversational, relaxed friends that have just met, but we've been friends forever because we're all committed to the same work of building community, of celebrating the family, of educating the children, of creating a future in which our communities, our families, and humanity says that all of us can say we won. We are winning, and we're winning doesn't mean that somebody else has to lose. It's a different approach, right? And I think that that's the spirit that binds us all. So on the show today, I've got the legislative and health policy director for the Minnesota Council on Latino Affairs, MCLA, Brother Adrian Magana. Adrian, good to see you, man. How are you?
Doing very well. I'm impressed by the pronunciation. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure
Not
to
a
be here.
problem. Es porque yo soy cubano, como tú. Y por eso.
Ayuda
yo
mucho.
entiendo. Bueno. And also on the program, Cassandra de la Cruz. Cassandra, how are you? Let me talk about you for just a second. So, Cassandra, are you in Minnesota now or in North Carolina?
No, I'm in North Carolina currently.
That's what I thought. Okay, that's cool. Cassandra and I are connected through our mutual relationship and work with my producer for this show, Carmen Robles. And Carmen has a wide reach of just wonderful and powerful and committed people, among them both Adrian and also Cassandra. Cassandra has worked 13 years in the sales area, 4 of those with corporate America, working in the business operations or as a business operations manager before transitioning into real estate, new home construction. And currently she's a licensed real estate agent selling new home construction for True Homes in North Carolina. That's why you're in North Carolina, right?
Yeah. North and South Carolina. So
okay. Cool. Cassandra studied marketing at Inter-American University of Puerto Rico. She's a graduate of Henry Sibley High School in Mendota Heights, and she was the first president of the organization that Carmen and I both affiliated with, Jóvenes de Salud, an after-school enrichment program that connects academics with community service. And Cassandra's youth leadership work led to the grassroots movement fighting the tobacco industry's methods to recruit young smokers, including kicking the tobacco industry support for Cinco de Mayo's St. Paul Parade. Her award-winning message through original song and dance, No Fumamos, received local and national recognition, including being selected as best practices at Center for Disease Control in 2008. And Cassandra is of Puerto Rican and Dominican descent, and I understand you enjoy using your bilingual, bicultural skills to educate people in the importance of building wealth through home ownership. Adriana, I saw in the note that you are both Cuban and Mexican, and so that's a connection there. And then the third person on the program is my new friend, who's also an educator, and that is Aaron Benner. He's a 25-year educator, been in the game a long time, is now the 11th grade dean of students at Cretan Durham Hall High School, but he's been an elementary teacher before that for 21 years in St. Paul. And the passion, what drives him, is simply an interest in helping all students be successful and become better citizens. He was nominated for the Minnesota Teacher of the Year in 2005, and he strongly believes that teachers and parents are the key to successful education and schooling. He also holds workshops for Catholic schools called Diversity Through a Catholic Lens. He's got a master's degree in educational leadership and administration from the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul. Well, guys, thank you all for being here. It's so good to see you all, good to meet you all, and to be with you. And so I just want to start by letting you introduce. I've read the notes that Carmen prepared for me, and they are wonderful. But let me ask you to just introduce yourself as well, and talk about who you are and why you do what you do, and sort of put in context the mission that you are on as a leader in community. And let me start with Adrian.
Very good. Well, thank you once again for having me, and it's an honor to be here with the other two guests as well. So my name is Adrian Magana or Adrian Magana, depending on which language you're speaking. I am the Legislative and Policy Director at the MCLA, as you had mentioned, and I kind of come to the MCLA from kind of a not so typical of a background. I myself used to be an educator. I used to teach both in Mexico and in the Twin Cities, and really the passion and drive that has kind of guided me has been social justice and the intersection between access and the barriers that we need to surmount. So that's really what brought me here. Right now, I'm working with health policy, but also still very invested in all sorts of areas that that can help our communities reach the equity that we all deserve.
Okay, great. And let's go to Aaron. Aaron, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the show. Nice to meet your other guests. I'm passionate. I guess I'm passionate about being a teacher. I've been in the educational game, as Al said, for 25 years. My mother says I have a baby face. Most people think I'm younger than I am, which actually is a gift. It's been a gift in the past 25 years of in the classroom. Being an African-American male, I've been told I'm basically a unicorn. It's very rare to see a Black man in front of a classroom. I didn't take that as much as a compliment or as a gift my first couple of years, but in years 9 through 21, I felt like I had a calling. I felt like this is what I was supposed to do, to help kids from my neighborhood, to help children who look like me succeed and tell my story, and to let them understand there is systemic racism, but we have a glorious history of overcoming systemic racism through our ancestors, through hard work. And throughout time, I realized I can't give this up. This is what I love to do. I'm not perfect. I'm still learning, but I thank God for all the blessings, for all the children that the students I've come across. And I have a little bit of my grandmother in me. She was an educator as well. There's a school in St. Paul called the Ruth Benner Head Start. So I think I get a little bit of her tenacity and passion for children through my late grandmother. And I just love doing what I do. And I hope I can continue for many more years. And I received plenty of compliments for saying I was a good educator, but I think I've learned a lot from my students, and I want people to know that.
Great. Thank you so much. And now, Cassandra de la Cruz. Good afternoon, Cassandra. So good to meet you and good to see you as well.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me along with the other two guests. This is really exciting for me. I mean, it's definitely different than what I'm used to. I say I got my start with Jóvenes de Salud. I was actually a youth going to high school, and it was a place that gave me a voice, and it really impacted my life because during that time I was going through a lot of struggles. It was 2006, 2007, and I was winning all these awards, and I didn't have a wall to hang it up because at that time I was actually homeless. I lived in 15 different homes within 2 years, and that's a big part of my story. I left to Puerto Rico, and this whole time I've been in touch with Carmen Robles. You know, she's seen the growth, and that kind of start was what brought me to real estate. I guess, you know, knowing how important a home is and the importance of home ownership kind of led me to become a real estate agent and help other families, you know, have that American dream. And that's kind of what I want to do now. And that's what I'm doing now, along with Jóvenes de Salud, is also kind of being that empowerment, like, hey, I know where you came from, I was there, and you have the power to do whatever you want. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
That's a powerful message. So
Yes.
I said to Adrian, before we started, podremos hablar en español y también en inglés. Y de vez en cuando presentamos en dos idiomas. Y si usamos español, si hablamos español, we have to also say the same thing in English, so we go back and forth. And for me, it's important and fun to do this because I tell people that I'm still learning Spanish, and I love the language. I love the sound, the feeling, the spirit of the language. And so when I get a chance to use it, I do. But I also think it's important for ordinary people to hear Al McFarlane and Cassandra and Adrian to all be fluent, in several languages, because that's what we do. That's who we are, and we navigate the world without fear or trepidation and with a sense of command of our thoughts. And we express that through the language, the words that we say, and the things that we do. And I know that probably means a lot to you, Brother Aaron. I didn't ask you which languages are yours.
I'm impressed with all of your bilingual skills, but I'm not bilingual. So as I'm looking at the box here, I'm thinking back to Sesame Street. Which one does not belong? That'd be me. So I have street language and professional language. I can go back and forth. So I guess I'm bilingual with that.
There we go. I think that's equally important to be able to translate and to move back and forth between. Let me tell you. When I was in school, in high school, I got compliments all the time from teachers and even my dad about being able to read. My training and my language skills, I owe in part to my father telling me, he would sit me down and have me read the newspaper to him on Sundays in particular, but several times during the week. And then he would compliment me, say, boy, you really have great articulation. You have great enunciation. And that just made me perk up, made my back straight, my head up. And so that little encouragement, but over a long period of time, gave me the confidence of hearing and knowing the power of my voice and my voice's ability to communicate and my ability to handle the written word in speaking, So it's really important. But to your point, Aaron, you grew up in the neighborhood, you talk like the neighborhood, right?
Yes.
And so you have to talk. Here's another story. My family lived in Worthington, Minnesota. Well, I'm from Kansas City, but my dad's job moved us from Kansas City to Worthington. Worthington, small white town, black kids. And so I'm the oldest of 12, second oldest of 12. So my younger brothers and sisters grew up in Worthington. The two youngest were born in Worthington. For all practical purposes, they are white people, right? In terms of how they talk and sound and navigate. So when my dad's job closed in Worthington and they moved back to Kansas City, they went back to the old neighborhood, and they told me this, I wasn't there, they went to the old school and everything was cool until you meet new people and you be in the hallway and somebody said something to me. They said, you guys, hi. I'm saying like they were said from Worthington, hi, how are you guys? And the whole room stops and looks at him and points to him and says, empty your pockets.
Wow.
We know that you're not from here because you don't sound like us. So that's what bilingual is about as well, being able to navigate the neighborhood and the community and to be comfortable in both places. So anyway, big story, fun story.
I want to add for an equity piece. It's beautiful to speak Spanish, and we all should be listening to people who speak different languages. And if it makes some people uncomfortable, so be it. But for me, that falls under the umbrella of equity. So thank you for speaking it.
There we go. So let's go with the legislative issue, the work that you do, Adrian, as the legislative and policy director for the Minnesota Council on Latino Affairs. What are the issues that you are advancing right now on behalf of the community?
Absolutely, yeah. So for those that don't know, there's a few different ethnic councils within the state. One of them being the MCLA. So the Council for Latino Affairs. So we have it broken down structurally into a few different focus areas. So I do health, and actually just found out this week that I'll be the interim director in education as well. So as far as health, that we're legislation that we're monitoring, COVID has kind of impacted a lot of the legislation that we're trying to look at, although the current situation with executive orders and all that, the legislature is not really able to impact that as much as they'd like. There's been some bills put forward, but we were kind of looking at a lot of bills that would have preempted the kind of disproportionate the tragedy that we saw unfold in Minnesota and the rest of the country, with various BIPOC communities that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. So we've been looking at legislation that could have preempted that. So most notably, there's a Minnesota Care eligibility expansion that we've been supporting and working on, which is headed by Representative Schultz. That's House File 11. But there are several other bills as well that we've been monitoring and have been excited to see introduced. Dignity in Pregnancy and Childbirth Act as well, which is seeking to improve access to positive health outcomes from maternal morbidity and fatalities as well. And we've also been looking at some mental health work that's being done that's trying to kind of create a more inclusive mental health community environment, as well as some other postpartum medical assistant extensions. So there's been several different bills that have been introduced that we've been monitoring.
How difficult or easy is it to get the community to feel involved, connected, and present in the legislative process?
It's difficult, historically speaking, for a number of reasons, and this is something that I think a lot of the different ethnic councils are experiencing in different ways. But there's a lot of barriers that have been put up and historic precedent for disengagement, and the traditional avenues to engage the community have usually been from an Anglo-centric viewpoint that doesn't always resonate. So it's been difficult. I think that various BIPOC communities have had just monumental human rights campaigns in the past that they can use to build on, and kind of ancestral histories that they can use to build on to try to re-engage in this process. But it's definitely been difficult. I think that we're making inroads, and it's all because of community organizations that are really leading the way. So, I mean, the unique position that we're in as the council is that we are able to connect those organizations with other state entities that wouldn't otherwise connect with them. So that's why the work that we're doing, we feel, is very important, because it's really a ground-up approach, and we're kind of the liaisons between state government and those community organizations that are doing amazing work.
It would be cool, Adrian, to give some props out to some of those partner organizations and community that are doing great work. So feel free to, if any of them are doing initiatives, or just describe some of the key players that.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be cool. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So we have Unidos is doing some great work that kind of organizing ground up approach. Copal. There is ACER, which is doing a lot of kind of right now with COVID response and kind of bridging the gaps between some of the medical communities and community members. They've all been doing amazing work, and really for them, it's been largely networking with their particular communities, and utilizing the human resources that are there and the experiences that are there to connect them to several different issues. So a lot of these organizations have been very multifaceted, working simultaneously in many different areas at once. And thankfully, there's these community response and recovery meetings that are had, and their voices have been invited there, and they've been very valuable and have begun driving kind of the COVID response from a shift from this pilot program that we used to have for the vaccines to some of the messaging that's coming out that they're also propagating to try to surmount some really understandable vaccine hesitancy based on historical precedent. So a lot of the work that we've experienced from them and on our part as well has been kind of trying to surmount that hesitancy and trying to get that also improved access to these resources. And being the year that we're in, it's very COVID centric, but these organizations have done amazing work in the past that predate COVID.
Great. And let me go to Cassandra. If you would sort of take up from there and talk about what you did with Hoviness in particular. And the question I began with is, how difficult is it for getting our community both aware and connected and motivated? And the reason for the question is, and you did address this, Adrian, is that too often our people are discouraged. They are, you call it the precedent, I think, of I forgot the word you used, but there's almost a systemic barrier. They don't even need to speak it, but it's the attitude and the feeling of the institutions that let us know that we're not part of the makeup of the institution. So it's hard sometimes to step up and step through. What is your thought and your experience about that?
Well, my experience, growing up in West St. Paul, the Mendota Heights area, at that time, I know it's changed a lot since I lived there. It was very white. There was no, diversity really in my school from a very young age. It was all white, maybe one Black kid in my school, me, one Native American, and that was it. And it was very hard to ever feel like I had a voice. Which is why Jóvenes de Salud is so important to me to this day, because that was the one place where we were all able to get together. And we weren't just the Hispanic kids together, we were all able to, talk about our own individual cultures. There was Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Dominican, Cuban. It was so diverse, and it all gave us a voice, and it gave us, the empowerment to step up and motivation to, hey, we're important in this. And I think especially for kids, it's hard out there as it is, and I think social media now makes it even harder. And so the importance of bringing awareness to culture and that equity and that belonging, and bringing awareness to Latino kids and that mentorship, I think is something that, Jóvenes de Salud is now taking a shift to social media, because that is an important platform nowadays, especially with COVID. Back in my day, it used to be just going and presenting and performances, but we don't really have that now. So
Right.
yeah, so social media is the big thing that we're trying to attack and get our voices out there and have kids feel like, mentorship, be a part of this, speak their voices. So yeah, I think it's really important.
Aaron, jump in here as an educator. How do we train our people, people of color in particular, to have a different sensibility, have the best sensibility, that we don't have those barriers in our mind? Sometimes we maintain barriers that may not be there anymore, but we're so used to them, right? And that's kind of the way that historical trauma works. The trauma could have been experienced by our parents or our grandparents or our great-grands, but that trauma remains present for generations, and we, maybe without thinking about it or knowing it, have an intuitive instruction that lets us feel a certain way, and therefore be skeptical or hesitant where we ought to be exercising our voice and being a part of, the decision making. What do you think, Aaron, as an educator? How do we acknowledge that and train ourselves differently?
First, I want to thank Adrian and Cassandra for what you do. Thank you. To answer your question, Al, the amount of skepticism that I've come across the past 25 years is enormous. The skepticism with school in general, the skepticism with having a white teacher, the skepticism with grading, the skepticism with the whole institution of education. When I first started teaching, and maybe Al, you can relate, you're a person, you're a Black person, you have to work hard, you can overcome these things no matter what. The paradigm has shifted for, I would say, since the 2000s. Now you have many kids who believe this is a setup. Why even try? And some of their parents believe it, and some of it's warranted. Some of our communities of color have not been treated well in our schools. What's difficult for me is trying to convince someone that, the playing field is not level, but education can help level it. And that was my little spiel. Maybe my first couple of years of teaching, it was easy. Now you have to fight with kids because they're like, this is, I'm not going to make it. That lack of hope is what's scary now. And how do you penetrate that? Because now it's not just a young kid saying it, it's coming from a young mother. It might be coming from a young father. So somehow education has become the enemy in some of our communities, not in all of our communities. And that breaks my heart, because I still believe education can break down barriers. Doesn't make it a level playing field all the time, but it can give us opportunities. And when I hear the lack of hope for education, I kind of throw my hands up like, oh, I have to start over. How can I reach this student? So right now in our community, especially in our young Black communities, school is like, whatever, I go there, it's a place to be. Social media, like Cassandra said, is huge. It has exploded in our schools. And schools must do a better job at trying to engage our students somehow with social media, with tech. Gone are the days of being at the chalkboard and preaching for 40 minutes. No, you're not going to reach any kid, not just a kid of color. We need movement. Movement is memory. We have to do something different from what was done in the past. I hope I answered your question. I kind of rambled there. I apologize.
Oh, no, that was a great answer, and that's a great conversation. So I'm going to ask all three of you. We talked a little bit about COVID-19. Let me ask you, first of all, Aaron, what's the impact of COVID-19 in your business as an educator, as a dean of students? What's happening both at your school, but also as a Black man in your community, your family circle? COVID-19, what's the impact?
So you have a tale.
Lead me to a different question that you'll appreciate.
Okay. So it's a tale of two different cities, basically. In a public school, they have a union that's fighting, we want to take precaution. We want to make sure before we go back, we have everything in place for our students. I work at a Catholic school or a private school. They're like, open up, wear a mask, good luck. So I'm newly married. I have a 7-month-old beautiful daughter at home, and my wife and I had to make a decision. Do I go back? And I'm like, honey, men of color are catching this disease quicker than other people. So we had to have a sit down. I didn't have the opportunity to take a year off. I had to go to work, and by the grace of God, nothing has happened. I haven't caught COVID. Several of my colleagues have, but it's a tough conversation. I come home, I'm fearful I'm going to get my daughter sick. The clothes come off immediately. There's a hot shower before I touch my infant, So Catholic schools, private schools, I think they've done well. Our school here has done extremely well, I have to admit. We've had very few cases with students. We do contract tracing. If someone has to quarantine, I'm pleasantly surprised. I thought for sure we wouldn't be open as much as we have been. We've been open since August. I've heard throughout the city and the state, private schools and charter schools have been doing well. But that still doesn't take away the risk and the trauma that you're always thinking about it.
Yeah, the stress.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Somebody asked today, I just had a colleague say, Aaron, you look like you lost a couple.
Any feelings or impressions or observations? Cassandra, you were saying, acknowledging that.
I mean, COVID, I try to look at the light in COVID. For real estate, it actually was amazing. It was an amazing year because to keep the economy running, they lowered the interest rates to a point where they haven't been this low in over 100 years. So it really brought up the market, especially with people having to work from home now. People who live in apartments are wanting more space, need an office space. So for me, when everything was shut down, I was still going into the model because I was considered an essential worker working for a construction company. So it was a crazy year, but I also think it was the silver lining is that it made you get in touch with your heart and what's important and your values. And I think it was also one of the things that made me realize, okay, like there's more to life than just what meets the eye, and we have to give back, and that's kind of what pushed me to get back involved with Jóvenes de Salud, even from North Carolina virtually, doing as little as I can or as much as I can, being here, throughout all this.
Adrian, what do you think? What are your thoughts, or reaction, response?
I guess two. One, I think something that stuck out to me that Aaron mentioned is that ourselves and our communities don't have the option not to go into work, which is one of the driving reasons, one of many driving reasons for this disproportionate impact that we're having on our communities. And there are many other reasons that are also very important to acknowledge as well, including access and much more. But the other thing that also comes to mind is trying to find those silver linings that provide the hope, because it's definitely a difficult time. And I've felt myself, and I know many others have felt, even Aaron, you were mentioning this with your students, a sense of hopelessness and that silver lining is very very important to keep going and to keep pushing forward. So I guess I was also thinking about the silver lining that Cassandra just offered us, which kind of hits close to home because I've always rented, and now, of course, too bad you're in the Carolinas, because right now we're thinking we're thinking a house might be nice with these interest rates, as you mentioned. But other silver linings that I've seen that maybe haven't been brought up before is that I think a lot of our communities have been saying this for a long time, but we're all connected. And when people try to quiet some of the discussions that are being had, or not pay it any mind when it comes to racial inequality, to sexism, to many other issues, they fail to realize that we're all connected. And the one silver lining that I see from COVID, as much of a disaster and a tragedy as it's been, is that it is highlighting how connected we are, and no community can be left behind, because now there's, I'd like to think that we always operate, or I would like to think that we could operate on just morals and doing what's right. But if we can't, we've had issues with that as a species in times in history. Right now, it's plain as day that none of us are getting out of this unless all of us get out of this. So that is the one silver lining that's been driving me forward, and I'm hoping to capitalize on that. And I'm hoping that we don't get back to normal, but we get back to better, and that we can use this as a catalyst for that. And briefly, before I go on too long, I studied history. I have a connection to history. It's kind of what's driven that passion for social equity is just learning about history, and also the history that we weren't taught and not told, and we're not supposed to know. We're not supposed to talk about. And some of the greatest changes in history that have happened have come from disasters preceding it. So I'm hoping that we can really make some changes and go forward much stronger as a state, as a country, as a world.
Aaron, when you say young people are showing up with this sense of hopelessness, are you talking about Black kids, kids of color, or all kids? How pervasive is that in your observation?
I would say it would be the Black kids I taught over my career as an elementary school teacher. It was from the information they were receiving from their parents or their grandparents, and they basically were saying, no matter what I do, I'm not going to be able to have a good job. No matter what I do, somebody white is going to use their privilege to take something away from me. And for me, that was something new I've never heard before. The sense of hopelessness, and I'm looking for the fighting spirit. You can do this. Look what your ancestors did. But just like, nah, no matter what, Mr. Benner, I'm not like you. You had a great life. Then that's when I get to share my story. Like, let me tell you where I came from. Same neighborhood. I don't get that. I can take this suit and tie off, but I can't take this color off. So let's talk about this. But it seems to be a prevailing sentiment in some of our Black communities. Not all of them, but almost like it is what it is. And don't get me started on some of the rap lyrics that talk about this stuff too. That's another situation. Some of our music perpetuates this hopelessness. Let me get mine, do what you can now, and then you have issues of morality that come in. So it's not gonna be an easy fight, but our kids are not, they may have some hopelessness, but we're not gonna lose hope on them,
So the question I was going to lead to, this was the preface, was for you all to consider this. I ask many of my guests this question. We talk about the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. I say that is exacerbated by the pandemic of, I would say 1619, but I think and we could also say the pandemic of 1492. And so, as a historian, Adrian, that is a good place to look at this question of white supremacy, right? And the impact of imperialism, of colonialism, of slavery, of the transatlantic slave trade, of the destruction and decimation of continents of populations in North America, in Central America, and in South America, and in the succeeding imperial or colonial domination of cultures and communities, and the eradication or the marginalization of indigenous people. And through all of that, our cultures survive. And you mentioned that education doesn't talk about the resiliency and the strengths and the validity of those cultures. Education has been the tool for eradicating the idea of racinating, right, human beings in favor of the universal adoption of the European idea of existence. Europeans operated, certainly in this hemisphere and in Africa, with the idea that both God and creation were their idea. They're the ones that thought of this notion of divinity, of what God is and what creation is, and therefore they presented themselves to the world as the owners and as the authority and as sovereign. And I think our cultures, and I'll say our, speaking of African and indigenous cultures in the Americas, saw and still see the world differently, but a consequence of the difference in how we understand and assemble reality has been the decimation and the destruction, the marginalization. But that's, in the long scheme of things, been a fairly short experience, only 500 years, right? And the truth now will emerge, I believe, and I hope, about who we are and our capacity to articulate both the strength of our existence, our culture, and our connection to eternity, looking both backwards and forward at the same time. And the reemergence of our personalities and our identities and our, therefore, capacities to negotiate what it is to be part of global reality. So I'm going on and on, but I'm going to throw it to you, Adrian. Respond to this thought. So comparing and competing, not comparing, but analyzing the consequence of the confluence of the pandemic of 1492 and the pandemic of COVID-19, and this as an inflection point. Adding into that the whole question of the impact of social media as a way of knowing and expressing knowledge that, in a sense, challenges organizations like classic institutional education and ultimately classic government, because new things must come from this. So what do you think? I'll stop. I'm having fun talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of languages, you're talking about language right now. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways we can go from that, and I think all the different directions would be valuable conversations to have. So, I'll say this for now and hope the conversation in some capacity continues going forward. One thing that I do want to really touch on earlier on in your statement, mentioning how education has been used and how it can be a barrier. The way I see education, it's an absolute tool that can be used for liberation or repression. It depends on how it's being used and who's controlling it. And I think that's why we see such a fierce resistance to some reform efforts that are happening, is because people recognize that, whether that's subconsciously or explicitly, that it is a very, very powerful tool. And so Aaron, I have the utmost respect for the profession and for what you're doing, and for anyone else too outside of education talking about these things. I have nothing but respect for that. I think that, going off of just, this enormous history of oppression, but also triumph, and just this hodgepodge, this mixture of everything that's happened. I keep coming back to this. This is kind of a thought that I've had is this country sorely needs a truth and reconciliation process. And I think until that happens, we're not going to be able to address a lot of these underlying issues, because there's so much to delve into there. And the one theme that I want to touch on that I think is just absolutely important from my experiences I've heard and just studying history is that there are so many different reasons to feel distrust and not hope, and so many reasons for that. And I think that the one thing that is really powerful is that there's been this kind of a divide and conquer tactic that has been used with a lot of our communities, and somehow a lot of the oppressed communities are fighting each other. And I think that we've made tremendous inroads in that. But I think that, when you were talking about earlier about language, like, it doesn't matter what color. Aaron, you're my hermano. We're trying to get some Spanish in there. You're my brother.
I knew that was brother. I knew that was brother, by the way.
Nailed it. Yeah.
Okay.
On point. Yeah. Very good. So, there's been, and even in this country, something that gives me hope and feeling of solidarity is the past, even the United Farmers movement collaboration with the Black Power movement and just civil rights in general, and the Brown Berets and the Black Panthers working together, and other groups too, all sorts of groups, and that really is something that gives me hope. And that's really, I think, the key is in education and solidarity. And I think it's important for us to move forward with and try to unify our objectives when we can, and respect each other's differences. But absolutely, we're in this together. So that's just kind of where I go. There's so many other ways to go from that. That was an amazing point, and I wish we could talk about that for hours. But that, at the risk of talking for too long, that's where I'll leave it.
No, that's cool. It is a lot to talk about. Cassandra, pensando en su cultura, favor de hablar de su familia, sus padres y los que preceded them. How do you put the ancestors, your sense of who you are, reflecting? I believe that we have our ancestors with us all the time, that they're nearby, they're watching, they're guiding. We simply have to attune and train ourselves to be quiet, pay attention, and listen, and that the ancestors both want and expect good for us and from us. And even though we make bad decisions from time to time or get put in bad situations, they are there to let us know in our feeling that we have the strength to both survive, overcome, and flourish. And so talk about your, is it the right word, parientes or sus ancestros? I don't know the right word for
You're like me. So, my first language is English, but my mother only spoke Spanish in the household. So I get confused the words all the time. So kind of, I'll be honest with you guys. Like when I was in high school, picking back on what Aaron was saying, kids feel defeated. They feel like, I give up. This system isn't meant for me. And I think I was one of those kids too, who felt very not accepted by my community. My father was an immigrant from Dominican Republic. He only had his 8th grade education and came to America and made a life for himself through lots of hard work. My mother was a single mother from Puerto Rico who moved down to Minnesota in her 30s. So at that time, back in the 80s, it was a really, really hard time for her. So I know I'm very privileged and very blessed to have the education that I had growing up in Minnesota. And I would say one way that I was able to overcome, the struggles and the insecurity of who I was and learning how to love and accept who I am is being part of a community, which is why Jóvenes de Salud was so important in my life, because it was a place that gave me a sense of hope. It gave me a voice. And I think that's one of the ways to get the needle moving is, having that sense of community within our schools. Whether it's, Afro-Latinos, Latinos all together, diversity, kind of having that community is very important to me. And I feel I get that from my ancestors. They didn't feel like they were part of anything, and they felt they had to come and they had to work twice as hard just to get the same results as somebody who's from here. So I really do feel that getting involved and having a place of community, and like Aaron, having a teacher or somebody that they could get close to. That's how Carmen was with me, that gave me a voice. And I think that's a way to kind of shift that mindset from I can to I can. Y si se puede. And I think that's very, very important, which is, like these conversations are amazing. And, I think it gives us all a voice and hope.
So, Aaron,
Yeah.
Aaron, jump in. Your thoughts when we talk about the pandemic of 1492 or pandemic of 1619, impacted by or at the intersection of the COVID-19 pandemic. Both of these things, the COVID-19 pandemic, in my mind, and I think Adrian said this, has put a light on, opened up, made us all examine this system of disparities and the history of it. And I think that the George Floyd incident compels the entire world to examine the meaning of and the method of control, and to eliminate any plausible deniability. I think the structure relied on a process of plausible deniability, meaning cops were trained to say, telling you were scared for your life, and therefore you had to kill him or kill her. And so now we're looking at this execution, and 50 million people around the world watched this execution, have watched it, and there's no plausibility for denial that this is what happened, though they're probably going to try it.
There'll be people who will say they'll find their excuses. Same thing with Philando Castile. Same thing with countless others.
Yeah. So what do you think? How do we assemble both of these events and their simultaneous connectivity, if we make it so, to be part of how we map a new future? How do we reimagine education so that the delivery system does what Adrian was saying, could either liberate or it can shackle? Mm-hmm. How do we ensure that our mission of liberation is what is taking place in the lives of children and of human beings?
So I'm gonna try to answer this in two parts. When all of you are talking, I think Elle even mentioned the word resiliency. And to connect with a student, and actually when I'm connecting to a student, actually I'm connecting to myself. I don't tell them that. This is my little secret. So oftentimes I'm challenged on my credentials just because I don't look the part of a teacher. I don't look the part of an administrator. I'm told so many times that you're smart, you're articulate. That's offensive to speak to a Black man. Why shouldn't I be smart or articulate? I don't need to hear you tell me that. I bring all this up because sometimes I can get the rage. If I get the rage, I know what young people are feeling. The resiliency, like you said, I have to remind myself and remind students, you come from someone powerful. We all do. Nobody has a monopoly on resiliency. Sometimes I hear some of my Black friends talk about, oh man, Black people were so strong, we overcome slavery. I'm like, okay, how about a Jewish person? How about a Hmong person with a child on her back crossing the Mekong River? How about a Cuban floating to Miami? Don't give me this. The human spirit has resiliency in our DNA. So we don't need to play the victim Olympics sometimes. I'm not talking about us, obviously. So sometimes I hear this hopelessness in children. I remind them who you are, who they are. You can do this. Sometimes we talk about microaggressions. And for me, I just like, microaggressions? Are you kidding me? My grandparents fought against macroaggressions in the South, not even the South. When you can lynch a man in his World War II uniform, so excuse me for not trying to focus on microaggressions, which are very important and it can lead to trauma. But I'm coming from a group of people who overcame macroaggressions. Hopefully I can be part of history and say, you know what? My grandfather, Aaron Anthony Bender, he overcame COVID. You know what? That fool got married during a COVID year and had a baby. What was he thinking? That's what I'm hoping that will be their story sometime. That's the silver lining. Cassandra talks about home ownership. For the longest time, I did not feel like I was a man yet because I didn't own a home. And I thank God last year I bought my first home ever, and I'm like, thank you. And my brother's like, about time. And I was like, yeah, but I'm like, y'all weren't helping me. I had to dig out of debt, so I sometimes sharing these stories, it does seem like hopelessness, but if I can talk about what I've overcome and tell another student that you can do it. But if you don't think you can do it, your ancestors did it. And that we have proof every day. And like I said, from every culture around the world, somebody is leading the way that you can do it. Yet the odds are stacked against you. It's horrific, but there's survival. I forgot the second. Oh, education. Administrators have to get together with teachers. I believe teachers are the foundation. Teachers and parents are the foundation of schools. I sound like a hypocrite because I'm an administrator right now, but I believe too many administrators become administrators just so they can kind of boss people around. If you have not been in the classroom in the past 2 years, you are not credible when it comes to any decision in education. That's what I believe. You have to be in the classroom. You have to know what the kids are saying. You have to know how to write a lesson plan. You cannot do your 3 years, 5 years, and leave the classroom and sit back and tell people what to do. I tell teachers all the time, if you're struggling with discipline, if you're struggling with testing, have your administrator come in and say, show me. If she or he can't do it, then you have to talk to a different teacher. But we need more administrators. And a lot of our administrators are people of color. They need to get back in the classroom somehow. I have no idea what that looks like, but I have no problem getting back in the classroom because I loved being in the classroom. That's where you're in the trenches, and that's how you make decisions. That's just me personally. I rambled on there. I apologize.
Listen, this has been perfect. The hour goes so quickly. We're done. This has been a good hour. But
Sorry to have the last word. I apologize.
No, that's fine. I'm so thankful, so grateful to you, Aaron, Brother Aaron, and so thankful to you, Cassandra. So thankful to you, Adrian, for being here, being in the conversation. This has been cool. And so if you like this kind of conversation, we want you to be a part of it. Like the channel. Subscribe to the channel, like us on Facebook, start a watch party, share the conversation with your networks. We're every day at 1 o'clock, and we think these are conversations worth having, and we're glad that you're part of them as well. These stories, we end up writing feature stories of these interviews that appear in the coming weeks in Insight News. Our goal is to be as to use this content. We're content creators. Use this content in as many ways as we can across radio, social media, the newspaper, and other tools and modalities as well. But thank you for being a part of this. Again, my panel, thank you all, and have a great, great day. Be well, do well. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys. Yep, take care.
Morning draws near, I rise and say my prayer. Little piece of bread to my mouth, little tea to wash it out. It's my daily tribulation, even though I'm a working man. I work so hard to make ends meet, soldier, with one suit and one shoe to my feet. Days are getting so hard, yeah, but I got to keep on pushing on this 9 to 5, working to stay alive. Working till the sun goes down. As the sun sets in the west, I pack my things and head on home, thinking about tomorrow's journey as I try these streets alone. Searching for liberation, yeah. Got to step out of Babylon, take a step to Mount Zion. Days are getting so hard, to stay alive. Oh, and it's 9 to 5, yeah. Working till sun goes down.